Longtemps considéré comme l'un des hommes les plus dangereux d'Europe, il a été arrêté à Dubaï en 2019.
Con la desarticulación de una red internacional de tráfico de drogas controlada por la temida mafia.
La criminalità organizzata mette a repentaglio la società.
Die Leute treffen sich nicht mehr auf der Straße, die Kinder gehen nicht mehr auf den Spielplatz. Man hat Angst.
The drug mafia has Europe firmly in its grasp. Shootouts, kidnappings, bomb attacks, executions, even torture chambers. Levels of violence once associated with Mexico or Colombia are now spreading across the major port cities of the old continent, in Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg, and Le Havre. Smaller towns and rural areas are also affected. But the epicenter of this wave of organized crime isn't Marseille or Sicily. It's the Netherlands. In Osdorp, a district in the west of Amsterdam, the fight against drug trafficking is in full swing. From 2019 to 2024, this unassuming building hosted the landmark Moringo trial. It was unlike anything the country had seen before. Drug lords and their associates stood accused of 10 counts of murder or attempted murder. Even inside the courtroom, intimidation continued.
It's a horrible trial. The prosecutors don't want to be known to the public. The judges don't want to be known to the public because fear is around this whole trial.
During the proceedings, a lawyer for a witness and a prominent journalist were assassinated. The former prime minister and the crown princess also received kidnapping threats.
Everybody was afraid. And all the participants in the trial were thinking, will I be next? Will I be the next one to be killed?
The Moringo trial is considered historic. For the first time, it exposed close ties between street-level criminals, business figures, and mafia bosses. A threat now spreading across Europe, whose origins all begin here in the Netherlands.
So we're all asking ourselves, when will this stop? And why have we been in this mess?
To find answers, we need to look back. What's happening in the Netherlands today is no accident. It's the result of a centuries-old model built on global trade. In these low-lying wetlands, the Dutch built their country by and on the water. For generations, they constructed dikes along the coast to protect against external threats and serve as a gateway to global trade. Shipping routes, ports, canals, roads, railways. This flat landscape was engineered to keep goods moving efficiently and without interruption. In the Kingdom of the Netherlands, trade has always had the top priority.
We are a country of tradesmen. You know, we're always at this crossroads where goods came in, goods were sent out, and there was people with money, bankers. The first stock exchange ever to be built was built in Amsterdam. So we have always been this international place of business. And a significant part of our wealth was earned in that time.
For centuries, we've been quite active on the seas. Sailors, navigators, discoveries. We made posts in Africa, in South Africa. We were in South Africa, also to the Dutch East Indies, to the Dutch West Indies. So we were always trading, and we all had an economic interest in that. So we are sailors, but we're also businessmen and traders.
So we stole, all kinds of, herbs, spices. We just stole it. We went to Southeast Asia, we went to Latin America, and we stole it and took it here and pretended that we were really good business people. We were thieves.
The story begins in 1581 with the founding of the Dutch Republic as they broke away from Spain. What followed was a golden age as the Netherlands rose to become a global trading power. As other European powers like France, England, Spain, and Portugal expanded, the Dutch built a network of trade-based colonies. In Indonesia, Southern Africa, Brazil, Suriname, the Caribbean, and North America, where New Amsterdam would later become New York. For the Dutch, one principle stood above all. Controlling territories must also mean controlling markets. Pepper, ginger, nutmeg, cinnamon, saffron, anise, cumin, as well as tea, tobacco, sugarcane, cocoa, and coffee. The Dutch bought raw goods from colonies and neighboring countries, processed them, and then resold them at high prices. In doing so, they laid the foundations of modern capitalism. Profit through added value. At the center of this system was the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, founded in 1602. Its fleet was larger than that of all other nations combined. The VOC was the first joint stock company in history and one of the most powerful corporations ever created.
The VOC, that's an interesting organization because it was not a state, it was not the Netherlands, but it was a commercial enterprise, basically. People put money together and they had ships and they sailed the waves and tried to conquer, in a way, new territories for profit.
In the 17th century, trade and mercantilism combined with another Dutch passion: botany. Thanks to herbaria and the first classification systems, the trade in ornamental plants flourished in courts across Europe. In the Netherlands, tulips sparked a speculative frenzy. In 1637, the market collapsed, popping what is often called the first financial bubble in the history of capitalism. Those who'd avoided bankruptcy turned to other profitable crops, including the opium poppy.
In the 18th century, they developed a monopoly on the import of opium in the Dutch East Indies. They manufactured opium in a smokable form, and they sold it in opium dens. And it was quite profitable for them.
By the 19th century, the Dutch state had taken direct control of the opium trade, using it to finance its colonies in Indonesia. They created a specially established administrative body and used their strict state monopoly to curb illegal trade.
There was a factory, a Dutch state-owned factory, that made the root opium. It was packaged in official Dutch opium boxes, and it was sold by state shops owned by the state. It was very profitable. But on the other hand, there was another movement, in a way, that was people were concerned about the opium smoking in the Dutch East Indies. Opium smoking became a bad habit. a vice, bad for your health. So they experimented with a number of instruments to reduce opium use. They had a price policy, and they made it more expensive. And then they noticed that the illegal trades increased. When they made it too cheap to fight the illegal trade, to smugglers, then more people got addicted and more smokers, and people smoked more. So they had to find the right balance in a way, not too expensive and not too cheap.
Built at the height of the Golden Age by wealthy merchants, Amsterdam's canal-side neighborhoods offer a picturesque backdrop. Yet much of that wealth came from what we would now call drug money. By the late 19th century, the Netherlands faced a dilemma: how to strike a balance between legality and illegality, between public health and government revenue. Whether tobacco, alcohol, or gambling, the questions raised by opium then still resonate today. At the start of the 20th century, the Dutch embarked on the production and trade of a new commodity: cocaine. As exceptional botanists, they cultivated coca plants from Peru in their colony in Java.
You had all these tea, coffee plantations. In between them, there was also coca leaves produced. This was a very profitable and totally legal market.
And so the number of plantations increased, and it appeared to be that the coca leaves from Java were from better quality than from Peru. So it was a good opportunity to invest in that.
In 1900, the NCF cocaine factory was established in the heart of Amsterdam, financed by the Colonial Bank. It competed with the German manufacturer Merck, a pioneer in cocaine production. As incredible as it sounds today, at that time, substances like morphine, heroin, and cocaine were sold over the counter. They were considered modern miracle drugs. Their use brought pleasure and euphoria across the Netherlands, but also in Germany, France, and the United States. Little was known about the dangers of addiction. During World War I, the Netherlands capitalized on its neutrality to supply British, German, and French troops. It sold tons of cocaine and rose to become a market leader.
Most of the drugs that we know at some point in history were legal. So at a certain point in time, we decided to make those drugs illegal and to start criminalizing them and tackling them with a war on those substances. It's at that very moment where we as a society decided these drugs need to be criminalized, need to be illegal. That's when the profitability of the model was born.
After the First World War, the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations, created a new international framework aimed at protecting populations. All member countries were obliged to regulate the drug trade. Under pressure from the United States and China, Britain, France, and the Netherlands, which was the most reluctant, ratified the Hague Opium Convention. This marked the beginning of a new era in drug policy. Over-the-counter sales were banned. Narcotics now required a prescription. The policy seemed reasonable, but it had devastating consequences. Recreational users suddenly faced stigma and withdrawal symptoms. Which of course pushed many to the black market. This marked the birth of the drug trade as we know it today. Heroin, cocaine, crack, LSD, MDMA, cannabis. Today, the distinction between hard and soft drugs may seem obvious. But it emerged only decades ago, in Amsterdam, in the early 1960s. Jazz, rock and roll, sexual liberation. Counterculture from the United States spread across Europe. In Amsterdam, the protest movements awakened deeply hidden desires. Following in the footsteps of their seafaring ancestors, hundreds of young Dutch people set out to explore the world.
Il ne faut pas oublier que la jeunesse du XVIIe siècle, elle allait découvrir l'Indonésie. On pouvait devenir grand explorateur.
From Iran to Afghanistan and India, these new explorers discovered Krishna, opium, and heroin. In Morocco, they experimented with keef and water pipes. But what would prove most significant was what they learned in Afghanistan, a method for producing hashish. In the Berber villages of the Rif Mountains, smiling young Europeans appeared, drawn by the mythos of its oriental region.
Historically, that has been the place where cannabis was grown. The people who live there, the indigenous people from the Rif, have been using the plant for many purposes, for medicinal purposes, for food purposes, as part of their medical plant uses. And from the 60s on, that has changed because the demand for hashish was fed by an enormous amount of Europeans that came to stay and to consume. And slowly the market for hashish started to grow, which changed for many people there who were, mostly very poor peasants, a new option to have an income.
Young Dutch, as well as Spanish, British, and French travelers, bought cannabis along the hippie trail and smuggled it back into Europe by car, airplane, or cargo ship.
The romantic view is, of course, that we're all hippies, so anti-capitalist. Well, among the hippies, there were always entrepreneurs. And you could, let's say, having your smelly Afghan coat and look like a hippie and travel also through Afghanistan and back. But in the meantime, at least be able to finance your trip with a good hotel.
For these aspiring young entrepreneurs, dealing cannabis to finance their lifestyle became the perfect business model. Houseboats in Amsterdam became illegal sales points in plain sight of the police. Such acts of provocation were a sign of the times.
Now, how many plants have you been selling?
We have been selling enough plants to have a harvest by the month of October of about 10,000 kilos of pure marijuana.
10 tons, you mean?
10 tons.
And you have also sold this in Western Europe?
We have sold it all to Holland, Western Europe, Holland, Western Germany, Belgium, and less to France.
Living up to their reputation as merchants, the Dutch soon dominated the European marijuana market. But this exotic commodity imported from abroad was also viewed as a threat that needed to be fought.
It was met with suspicion. It was associated with rebellion, with agitation, because we didn't know the substance.
And at first, the response of the police was very fierce. People got arrested. People got imprisoned for a couple of months because of 2 joints, for example. You know, the penalties were very harsh. It was a very repressive system in the Netherlands.
Despite arrests and harsh sentences, underground dealing continued in cafes, bars, and trendy Amsterdam nightclubs such as the Paradiso and the Fantasio.
And then there was a guy who thought, well, I have a bar, why shouldn't I have a dealer who sells only marijuana? And one guy started doing that. Got closed down, arrested a couple of times.
They are committing a crime according to the drug law, but they are very different from shoplifters, from thieves. They are quite normal people.
So what's going on here? Is criminal law a right instrument to counter it and to suppress it in that way? And debate started.
En over 10 jaar, als het dan zover is, nou, dan zitten de mensen misschien met een joint bij de tv en dan zeggen ze van ja, zo is het begonnen.
Public opinion, the justice system, and police became more relaxed. Arrests became less frequent, and sentences were reduced. Then, in 1971, the United States took a hard turn.
America's public enemy number 1 in the United States is drug abuse.
President Richard Nixon publicly declared a war on drugs, a conflict that continues to this day. This marked the beginning of a radical shift in Western drug policy. Their future slogan, "Just say no." In the early 1970s, the US was gripped by a heroin crisis, fueled by imports from Europe and Asia. The US government struck hard. In 1972, mass arrests dismantled heroin smuggling networks in southern France. But the war on drugs proved endless. Criminal networks quickly reorganized. Heroin, which had previously flooded the US, found a new market in Europe. In Amsterdam, the relative tolerance toward cannabis was speeding up the spread of heroin. Dealers offered both in bars and nightclubs. Heroin consumption in Amsterdam boomed within just a few years. By the late 1970s, the city had become one of Europe's main heroin hubs, with around 10,000 heroin addicts in a population of only about 700,000. The public health crisis forced the Dutch authorities to implement a decisive reform of the 1919 Opium Law.
So the idea was, it was a kind of package deal, a stricter policy towards hard drugs and a more liberal policy towards cannabis products.
It's what's known as the separation of markets. You separate the cannabis market from the heroin market.
Cannabis wil kopen in een plek waar dan die verkoop van.
So someone who's buying cannabis will never come into contact with heroin.
Dat hij niet in contact komt met heroïne.
In 1976, the revision of the Opium Law was passed. With it came the distinction between hard and soft drugs, as well as harm reduction measures which have since revolutionized the treatment of addicts. This ushered in a new era for cannabis users, the age of the coffee shops. By the mid-1970s, Amsterdam had earned a reputation as the coolest travel destination in the world.
So when we semi-legalized coffee shops, there was initially in Amsterdam there were 5 or 6. And 10 years later, so in the middle of the 80s, there was something like 175 coffee shops all over the country. So you got what we called drug tourism.
When they created their coffee shop model, they defended the idea that criminalizing and waging a war on drugs is not always effective. The Dutch have put a lot of effort at that time to try and tell the rest of Europe and the world, we don't think this is a war you can win. We would like to try something different. Drug use is a matter of public health, and we would like to treat it that way. And that's why the Dutch were at the forefront in drug policy innovation in the 70s.
Cannabis consumption might have been decriminalized, but a problem remained. As a signatory to international drug control treaties, the Netherlands could not import cannabis for its coffee shops without the risk of being labeled a narco state. With entrepreneurial spirit and a pragmatic approach to drug policy, the Dutch therefore developed a questionable system known as the back door. In Haarlem, west of Amsterdam, Heinz Hafraat owns several coffee shops. He's still grappling with the regulations introduced in 1976.
Welcome. This place is Cannabis Café Maximilian. And you can see we have a complete menu here. Yeah, so we have a lot of kinds of marijuana here. And then we have also one drawer full with joints and smokables, hashish, Moroccan hashish.
Een koffieshop heeft een voordeur en een achterdeur.
A coffee shop has a front door and a back door. At the front door, where the customer buys cannabis, it's all more or less regulated. You can just go inside and buy a maximum of 5 grams, and then you smoke it there, or you go home. And there's no problem. The back door, however, where the coffee shop owner has to buy their cannabis, well, that's totally illegal.
Dat is volslagen illegaal.
So every straight-minded person would ask you, but wait a minute, but if you're allowed to sell it in small amounts, but you're not allowed to buy it in bigger amounts, how does that work?
Oh yeah, this is, for example, we cut it here. This is Moroccan block hash. That means it's made from Dutch seeds and grown in Morocco. Don't ask me how it gets here, but it's here. It's just like a system, what goes out, you put in. What goes out, you put in. And this is the job for the back door. We call the back door, the achterdeur. Yes.
The back door is the loophole in the system. Through this secret passage, illegal cannabis imports enter the Netherlands. Police and customs authorities quietly look the other way. Criminals exploited this loophole, and the back door became an entry point for the illegal drug trade. By the mid-1980s, the Moroccan Reef had become Europe's primary cannabis supplier. Over a span of 15 years, cultivated areas had increased tenfold. Cannabis was the only profitable crop in this dry, remote region, one of the poorest in Morocco. The Berbers of the Rif had long been isolated from the rest of the country. At the beginning of the 20th century, the region witnessed North Africa's first anti-colonial liberation struggle. After Morocco gained independence in 1956, the people of the Rif suffered violent repression under future King Hassan II. The Rif became a land of suffering, which many left behind. Among the main destination countries were the Netherlands, especially Amsterdam. When demand for hashish exploded in the 1980s, the first coffee shop supply chains followed the migration routes of the Rif diaspora. Small quantities were smuggled by Moroccan families returning from holidays in their home villages.
I mean, obviously Moroccan people say, hey, it's kind of legal in the Netherlands, so let's call my brother or my uncle or my old friend from high school and, bring it in. We can make money here. And it's kind of legal. Or it's not, yeah. Well, let's do it.
Cannabis still came from Morocco. But by the mid-1980s, it was no longer hippies, but underworld bosses who controlled distribution in the coffee shops. A violent and barely concealed criminal underworld which controlled not only the lucrative hashish trade, but also gambling, prostitution, and the heroin market. In Amsterdam's red light district, a young man from a well-to-do family became the symbol of this criminal model. Klaas Bruinsma. He laid the foundations of the modern Dutch drug trade.
Bruinsma, I would define primarily as an innovation-oriented businessman with a business education, a business family background, and always looking for new ways. And profit oriented, so how can I make more profit? He had this network, but he did not copy the sloppiness, so to say, of the hippie, not too stoned and then forget that you had to deliver, but set up an agency, more or less, a network that offered good service from the perspective of users and small-scale suppliers. So good quality, clean packed, delivered in time, always enough on stock, or at least able to provide the market with a variety in quality and for a fair price. Just like you would do as a capitalist entrepreneur. You open a store, you must be open during opening hours, and sometimes when you have a night store, you must be open at night. Well, that's exactly what Bruinsma brought new in.
Klaas Bruinsma eliminated middlemen and organized imports from Morocco himself. To maximize shipments and better conceal his merchandise, he sent hydraulic presses to his producers in the Rif Mountains so they could shape the hash into soap-sized blocks. Bruinsma established a standard of 250-gram blocks.
He was able to create an organization, people having the different roles, a division of roles over time, with the importation and the distribution. That was Bruinsma mentality. That's what Bruinsma did by taking care of the hash production in Morocco. You offer them equipment, and then you get better quality.
Business boomed. A seasoned businessman, Bruinsma surrounded himself with tax lawyers to invest in real estate and launder money in Amsterdam and the Bahamas. Intoxicated by his own wealth, Klaas Bruinsma bet big and lost. In the early 1990s, police seized a shipment of 45 tons of hashish. Betrayed by his competitors and isolated, the Netherlands' biggest gangster was later shot dead outside a Hilton hotel. His empire collapsed, but his criminal model would survive him.
There is not a monopoly, and there is not one mafia, and there is a lot that is not mafia organized. In criminology, we see the drug market is largely disorganized. It is not one big organization, but it runs from project to project. And of course, there are business leaders that are always behind the projects and the little networks. But you need to be flexible. And that is the challenge for criminals, the entrepreneurship. Probably not so much the drug, but making it into a creative, profit-making action. We often forget. It is the fun of a lifestyle, of being on the thrill of being a criminal.
With the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, the drug landscape changed. As heroin lost its shine and was overtaken by synthetic drugs, the Netherlands shifted from a transit hub to a production country.
Heroin was this drug of doom and gloom. And ecstasy was this drug, let's party, let's have fun together. Capitalism is winning, the communists are going out. Let's celebrate. And ecstasy was the drug that captured that moment in time. But somebody had to make that ecstasy. And that happened in the Netherlands. Criminals started investing their money from hashish into ecstasy. So smuggling and trafficking stuff, that's what we've been good at all along. So hashish, cannabis, heroin, we'll do it. And if we wouldn't do it, the Moroccans would do it or the Turkish would do it, because, this country is an open country. There is so many different nationalities living here with, different ethnic, cultural backgrounds. So that's what the trade is. Trade is international, and that's like the core of this country. So besides becoming a country of traders, we became a drug-producing nation. And that's when the Dutch drug economy flipped.
In 1995, U.S. drug enforcement agents alerted the Dutch police. The country was synthesizing 20 million ecstasy pills per month, or 70,000 per day, approximately 3/4 of global production. Added to this was a brand new botanical innovation, Nederhash, cannabis grown in the Netherlands. This hybrid plant was produced indoors and was 3 to 4 times more potent than the original plant. Nederhash cultivation spread rapidly across the country. The back door became the front door. Production now took place at home. Fears of a narco-state spread. With the ratification of the Maastricht Treaty, Amsterdam became the Wall Street of drugs. In a Europe where the last border checkpoints had disappeared, the French and Germans started to pressure the Netherlands to take action.
À l'heure du marché unique, sa législation est jugée bien trop permissive. Aux Pays-Bas, la vente du cannabis rapporterait 1,8 milliard de francs par an, un pays épinglé dans plusieurs rapports aujourd'hui.
In 1997, the opium law was revised again. Indoor cultivation was reduced, and hundreds of coffee shops were closed. But drug money had long since seeped into the legal economy. One event would bring to light the entanglement between organized crime and the Dutch business establishment. In the 1990s, Monaco was a popular meeting place for international real estate investors, entrepreneurs, and high net worth individuals. At charity galas, members of the underworld mingled with affluent guests and crowned heads.
There was one table in that big room, and it was bought by organized crime. And that table was next to Dutch royalty, who were also there.
John Miramet, a notorious Amsterdam gangster. His partner, Sam Klepper, drug trafficker and Hells Angels member. And Willem Holleder, known for the kidnapping of businessman Alfred Heineken. All three of them were seated at the same table.
How did these people that everybody seems to consider bad and they were violent and they were there? Where we always thought that the underworld was this, big, dark, gray area where we couldn't see. But actually, that was a fictitious image, because the underworld was right there with, if we could name it like that, the upper world, the highest tier of our country. And the fact that they were mingling and mixing, it was fascinating. And, if we talk about money or morality, who wins? And in the Netherlands, it's always money. And that's what, that table at that gala, what that says about the Netherlands.
Sam Klepper and John Miramet were murdered in the early 2000s. Willem Holleder is serving a life sentence for 5 counts of murder. The path was clear for a new generation of criminals. The greatest talent of the Dutch resides in their capacity to constantly reinvent new markets and find new avenues for trade. This created a dangerous dynamic that would soon prove costly for the country and its neighbors. For this was the poison that would fuel the profits of today's drug trafficking networks. In the early 2000s, a new era dawned for cocaine, and a new criminal organization moved into the spotlight, the infamous Morocco mafia.